Well, in chapter 32 of Numbers, we come to, I suppose we can call it, the final details that Moses had to sort of tidy up. You remember the Lord spoke to him that it was he needed to take himself up to a mountain, and that eventually God was going to take him home after his job was finished. Well, his job is winding down. And so there are certain things, the paperwork you might say, as they say, no job is finished till the paperwork is done. So this is the important stuff that has to be taken care of by the great servant of the Lord and Moses. Now, the children of Reuben, it tells us in verse 1, and the children of Gad had a great multitude of livestock. And when they saw the land of Jazer, or Yazer, and the land of Gilead, that indeed the region was a place for livestock. And the children of Gad and the children of Reuben came and spoke to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, and to the leaders of the congregation, saying, in verse 4, the country which the Lord defeated before the congregation of Israel is a land for livestock, and your servants have livestock. Therefore they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession, and do not take us over the Jordan. So, here's the situation. The children of Israel are now encamped on the east side of Jordan, and God is about to move them over the Jordan River into the west side, into the land of Canaan. This was God's plan, you remember. 40 years earlier, that was the plan. He sent spies into the land. 10 of the spies came back and said, no way, too scary, we ain't going. And God says, well, if you're not going to trust me, I'll let you wander around for 40 years. And that's what they did until they all died off. Well, now they get to the land. They could see it. You could see it. I've been there. You could see across the Jordan, you see the land. And now they say, you know what? We'd like to stay here. Look at these fields. This is now beautiful farmland. We can raise our cattle here. It's perfect for cattle. How about this become our inheritance? Well, Moses pretty much went berserk. And Moses said, verse 6, said to the children of Gad and to the children of Reuben, shall your brethren go to war while you sit here? What are you, crazy? You think that's going to go over well? No. He said, now, why will you discourage the heart of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord has given them? In other words, if you guys stay here, what's going to prevent the other tribes of saying, yeah, let's not go through the hassle of war. There's plenty of room here for all of us. We'll just stay here. That was not God's plan. God wanted them on the other side. And so Moses is kind of chewing them out here. He says, this is what your fathers did when I sent them away from Kadesh Barnea to see the land, or to spy out the land. I already mentioned that. And then he went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land. They discouraged the heart of the children of Israel so that they did not go into the land which the Lord had given them. And that, of course, led to that 40 years of wandering, which he mentions here in this chapter. So the Lord's anger was aroused on that day, not the day that they were coming to Moses, but before that, after the spying incident. He swore an oath, saying, surely none of the men who came up from Egypt from 20 years old and above shall see the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me. That's an interesting concept. Wholly following the Lord. Completely. That's what we're talking about. To completely give yourself over to the Lord. Even if sometimes he may ask us to do difficult things. Now, the children of Israel were being asked to be poised and ready to go across the Jordan River. There are going to be some bad people over there. They're not going to welcome you, so you're going to actually push them out of the land. It's going to be difficult, but I will be with you. And if you will trust me, you're going to find this land is a wonderful place for you. You're going to live there for many generations, and you're going to find many blessings if you will just obey me and wholly commit yourself to me. Now, of course, this goes to a Christian application. And there is a very important Christian application, and I hope you'll see it as we go through these verses. And he mentions Caleb and Joshua being the only ones who committed themselves to the Lord wholly. For they have wholly followed the Lord, it says there in verse 12. There is a contrast. It tells us that there are some Christians who are wholly committed to the Lord, and they will find blessing and favor with the Lord. There are those who are not wholly committed to the Lord, and they're going to remain outside of the promises of God, outside of the blessings of God. Oh, yeah, they may be in the kingdom, they may go to heaven, but the life on the earth is going to be different. That's the point that is being made here. And then he says that in that situation, verse 13, the Lord's anger was aroused against him. He made him wander in the wilderness for 40 years until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone. Now, he calls it evil. What was the evil that they did? That they didn't wholly commit themselves to the Lord. They just didn't believe that God had blessings for them, and so they didn't step into the promise of God. And look, he says in verse 14, now you have risen in your father's place. You're doing exactly what they did, a brood of sinful men, to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will once again leave them in the wilderness and will destroy all these people. And Moses is saying, not on my watch. No, sirree, you are not going to get away with that. I won't let that happen again. Or you will be wandering perpetually in the wilderness on the wrong side of God's blessings. And again, there's a very important spiritual principle there that most definitely applies to the Christian life. The idea of crossing the Jordan is crossing over into this new life of abundance that God is talking about. This is a type, a principle that God is teaching us in the Old Testament, but it absolutely applies to the Christian life. There are people who believe in God. There are people who want to be part of heaven. They want to go to heaven. But they struggle really with the promise of God and never really enter into the fullness of God. They're trapped. They're trapped on the wrong side of the river, wanting to have all of the blessings over there, but they won't step in faith and cross into that life of blessing and fullness and joy and abundance. And so they wander. And they wander around, so unsatisfied, so unhappy, complaining all the time because nothing ever seems to go right. This life is so hard. Why did I even become a Christian? What's the point of becoming a Christian? There's no joy. There's no blessing. Life is so hard. It's because you're on the wrong side of the blessings. You're on the wrong side of where God wants you to be. And so this becomes, I think, a very serious problem in the Christian world. Well, they heard what Moses said. They agreed with him. So they came near to him again in verse 16. We will build sheepfolds for our flocks here on this side of the Jordan, cities for our little ones. But we ourselves will be armed and ready to go before the children of Israel until we have brought them to their place, and our little ones will dwell in fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. Now, obviously, they're not building cities. What they were doing was capturing cities, and they captured them, and then they would be able to secure their families in these houses after they'd run everyone out. They took over the land, took over the property, took over the buildings, took over the houses, put their kids in it. Then they're going to arm themselves and go to battle on the other side of the Jordan River and fight with their brethren, and that was the plan. And so he said, we will not return to our homes until every one of the children of Israel has received his inheritance. Now the inheritance is the land and everything that's in it. That's what God promised them. That is the inheritance. And so we will not inherit with them on the other side of the Jordan and beyond, because our inheritance has fallen to us on this eastern side of the Jordan. Now that's where they were wrong. There was far more blessing, far more inheritance on the other side. they were content to stay on the east side. And God was promising them much more on the north side. Now, the east side of the Jordan River today is the nation of Jordan. And it's weird. If you ever had the opportunity to go over there, you actually see the river going through the center, or the eastern coast, or the eastern border of Israel. And on that eastern side, it's really quite funny. On the eastern side of the river, it's brown. All of it's brown, sort of underdeveloped land. The western side is garden, oasis, crops, fields and fields, and orchards and orchards of all kinds of vegetables and fruits and everything that actually has become a major source of income for the Israeli people, that they're able to export their vegetables and goods to all parts of Europe and the rest of the world. But then there's Jordan. And that part of the country just hasn't been as blessed, or that part of the world just doesn't seem to have been as blessed as what God has done in the nation of Israel. You can see it on a map. You'll see brown on the east side, green on the west side. It's just the way God made it. It's the way it is today. And so they chose the wrong side. And yet they thought, no, we're good here. This is our inheritance. And that's the problem with Christians, is they settle. They settle for what they think, this is enough, this is all I need, when God has so much more for us. And Moses then agreed. He said, if you do this thing, if you arm yourselves before the Lord for war, and all your armed men cross over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven out his enemies before him, and he said, all right, we'll do it. But, verse 23, if you do not do so, then take note, you have sinned against the Lord. And you can be sure, he said, that your sin will find you out. Meaning, there is a consequence for your sin. Your sin will catch up to you. There is nothing hidden from our God, nothing at all hidden. The New Testament puts it in the way of sowing and reaping. If you sow to the flesh, you will from the flesh reap corruption. If you sow to the Spirit, you will from the Spirit reap life. And so God is, through Moses, his servant, is telling the people, there is a consequence for going back on your word, a consequence for not doing the right thing. So he says, go ahead, do what you're going to do. Verse 27, but your servants will cross over, every man armed for war, before the Lord to do battle, just as my Lord says. So Moses gave command concerning them to Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun. Why? Well, because Moses wasn't going to be there for them to actually, to see them fulfill their promise. And so this is how it went down. And in fact, the history will show that's exactly what happened when they cross into the Jordan, which you'll see in the book of Joshua. But he tells Eleazar and Joshua in verse 30, if they do not cross over, well, then they have to go into the promised land with you, and then you have to split it up. And so the children of Gad, children of Reuben, verse 31, answered, saying, as the Lord has said to your servants, so we will do. And we will cross over armed before the Lord into the land of Canaan, but the possession of our inheritance shall remain with us on this side of the Jordan. So Moses gave the children of Gad to the children of Reuben and to half the tribe of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites. So there are actually 2.5 tribes that were involved in this agreement. Half of the tribe of Joseph's son Manasseh was decided, yeah, we're ranchers too. We're raising cattle, so we'll stay here with them. But all of you had to arm your soldiers, and they had to go and fight. Now, here's an interesting reality or truth in the history books, and that is that the first tribes that were actually conquered and captured were these 2.5 tribes that were on the wrong side of the Jordan. They had failed to be in the place of blessing, and so they stayed on the fringe. And on the fringe, if you're a Christian, on the fringe, you are in a place of of unprotected safety. You are unprotected. You are free meat. You are open for attack or deception or trouble or problems. It's best to get yourself on the correct side of the Lord completely, wholly committed to Him. All right, chapter 33. Chapter 33 is actually a chapter we can quickly summarize. It's really a history, or more of a record, of where the children of Israel journeyed over the 40 years of wandering. So, in verse 1, these are the journeys of the children of Israel who went out of the land of Egypt by their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. Now, Moses wrote down the starting points of their journeys at the command of the Lord. And these are their journeys according to their starting points. So, in a little piece of information here, it's a bit of evidence or further evidence that the servant of the Lord Moses actually authored these first 5 books of the Bible. There's been always a kind of a bit of a controversy. How could Moses have written, Genesis? He wasn't even there. How could he have done that? Well, he did do that because the Lord commanded him. The Lord told him what to write. He told him all about it. Why Moses? Well, if you remember, Moses was educated in the courts or the household of Pharaoh. He was educated in the highest form of education that you could possibly have gotten in that day, in that age, in that region. So he was the educated one, and God made that happen. And He took him out of Egypt and said, I'm calling you to do something great. By the way, bring your pencil. So he's got to write it all down. So he's writing all this stuff down because God is having him keep the record. And the rest of this chapter, or most of the rest of the chapter up until verse 49, is really where they went. And if you're into the geography and history of it, and you could read it. If you want to know more, then I suggest you talk to Ben Stoneman. He's into all this kind of stuff. And verse 50, now the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab. That's, again, right across the river of the Jordan River. From Israel across the river is Jordan, the country of Jordan today. These are the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. And speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you have crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you. God said, I want you to destroy their engraved stones, destroy all their molded images, and demolish all their high places. Now, you hear this, and our mind, our modern mind, we're in a day right now when there's a lot of people that are being displaced. You hear the news, and there are people being chased out of their homes all the time, in other countries for the most part. We know that. We have, controversy at our border, whether we should let them in or not let them in. There's people coming because they're coming from places that they're being forced out of. And there's a big part of a lot of us that want to be compassionate about that. We want to receive them. We want to give them safety and security. And I think any good country would want to do that. But here we see sort of the other side of it. The Jewish people, at God's command, are going to create an ethnic cleansing, so to speak. God is commanding them to go into this land and drive out the people who are living there right now. And our modern mind says, wait a minute, that's not right. That's not fair at all. How can these people just go in there and just kick out these people who are living there? Well, it doesn't sound so good when I put it that way. But God, if you could take these people and kind of put them up against the rest of humanity, especially in that day, you would realize that they were probably on the lowest rung of the moral scale. These people, I guess to put it in a nutshell, were just disgusting, immoral, pagan people. They did things and in their statues and all these things that God wants them to get rid of, they were vulgar, they were idolatrous, they were insulting to women, they were insulting to children, they were as disgusting as you can imagine. In God's view, these people shouldn't be alive. They have kind of gone beyond the point of no return. And so, if you want to look at it this way, and it's really the way I think we should look at it, this is God's judgment upon these people. And so the judgment was to bring an invading army. Remember, later on in the history of the Jews, they turned away from God, they became idolatrous, and God's judgment came against them because of their immorality. They were driven from the promised land as a result. So God has patience with people, but he has a limit. And when that limit has been reached, he must act because he hates sin that much. These people were vulgar, terrible, lowest form of immorality known to man at that time, probably in the history of the world, other than the flood. The flood, immorality, and disgusting idolatry was so horrible that God destroyed all of them except for 8 people. So we are to judge God in his actions is just above our pay grade. So don't do it. It's just not wise. God has a reason for doing what he does, but it's important that we understand why he would have been motivated to drive these people out. Not just that. He said, I want you to destroy all of their paintings, all of their wall murals, all of their statues, everything that is there. Destroy all their molded images, demolish their high places. What were the high places? They were the sanctuaries that were established up in the higher hills, under the trees or with the trees, where they would offer babies to their gods. And God just couldn't tolerate that, and so I want it gone. Notice verse 53, you shall dispossess the inhabitants of the land, meaning kick them out, and then you shall dwell in it. For I have given you the land to possess. So if you're going to live there, you're going to have to clean house of all of those idols, because I don't want any part of it to be involved with you. You shall divide the land by lot as an inheritance among your families, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But in verse 55, if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall be that those whom you let remain shall be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land right where you dwell. Moreover, it shall be that I will do to you as I thought to do to them. And that is exactly what happened in Israel's future. What God is saying, you have to get rid of this sinful pollution because it will influence your life in the wrong way. And if that happens, there will be serious, serious consequences for you. Now, of course, you can take this into your spiritual life as well. Not that it's a command necessarily to us, but it certainly is a principle of wisdom. If there are influences in our lives that are causing us to compromise or causing us to slip into sin or to play with sin, isn't it better then that we cut it off and get rid of it from our life so it doesn't have an opportunity to influence us? If we don't cut it off, then what'll happen? Well, there are consequences for that. Especially if we become entangled by it, we become trapped by it, then there will be consequences. Jesus himself wanted us to know just how serious our relationship to God is. He said, if your right hand offends you in your relationship to God, well, then get rid of your right hand. Get rid of it. That's how serious he is. How far will you go to be right with God? How far will you go to make sure that you're not going to let offensive things to your spiritual life and livelihood influence you? And that's what Jesus was saying. He said it's better that you enter life with missing a limb rather than to have a full body and be cast into hell. So you don't want to do that. The consequences are too great. The stakes are high. So get rid of anything that will influence you away from the Lord. So if you have those things in your life, take an inventory and start making real tough decisions. Cut off your right hand if you must. Cut off your best friend if you must. Cut off that boyfriend or that girlfriend that is leading you in the wrong place. Do whatever you have to do to stay close to the Lord. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you as an inheritance, the land of Canaan to its boundaries." And this chapter, at least this part of the chapter, divides up the land, not divides it up, but puts boundaries around where the promised land is. This is where I want you to go. This is what you will conquer when you go into the land. And it's almost where Israel is today. There's a lot of it missing. And of course, today, a lot of the land in Israel that you know today, Israel has like a triangle down at the bottom, and that's sort of Israel. It's bordered on the north by Lebanon, as far as Tel Dan, and then Mount Hermon is up at the top there, and then you along the side of Jordan, and then go down, and there's Egypt down below there, and this is pretty much where the border is talking about in this chapter, except right now today Israel has a bit less than what God wanted them to have as their promised land. This is because of wars, because they hadn't completely taken what they were supposed to take. Yes, they didn't do what the Lord told them to do. They became idolatrous people. God kicked them out of the land. So the consequences is they don't have today the land that God promised to them. Add to that, of course, you've got other meddling countries, and so the land within Israel today is divided up with Palestinian territory and different places and all of that, and there's all this thing going on about a two-state solution and all this sort of stuff that's happening right now. The bottom line is God said this is what your promised land is, and this is what is to be yours if you step out and take it by faith. These are what we should call the divine boundaries of Israel. And all they had to do was walk in faith, step out in faith, and take possession of what God said it's yours. Now, this, of course, is the same thing in our Christian life because God has given us the promise of abundant life. It's yours. And what we have to do now is to continue to walk in faith, step in faith, and actually possess it. Take it, it's yours. And this is where we fail sometimes. We don't step in faith, or we think, well, I'm not that good, I'm not good enough, or we just continue to stay on the east side of Jordan. And let me clarify that a bit. That is a carnal life on the east side of Jordan. It is a life that is not wholly committed to the Lord, only partly committed to the Lord. And you cannot possess the full promise of God if you are only partly committed to the Lord. And then we become frustrated. We're partly committed. We don't really want to give ourselves wholly. I don't want to arm myself and fight the good fight. I don't want to have to wear that armor, the spiritual armor all the time. I don't want to have to do all that. So I'm just going to stay over here. You know why it's good there? There are no enemies there. There are no enemies to fight on that side. You're going to slip away into complacency and sort of be lukewarm. Just be lukewarm over there. There's no enemy there. The devil doesn't attack lukewarm Christians. He just wants you to stay lukewarm because you can't affect anything that way. But there are no blessings there. This is the problem the children of Israel had. They certainly didn't obey because they didn't get rid of all of the high places, all of the places of worship, and so they compromised. That compromise led to their destruction. Verse 13, then Moses commanded the children of Israel, saying, this is the land which you shall inherit by lot, which the Lord has commanded to give to the 9 tribes and to the half-tribes. So 2.5 tribes of Gad and Reuben and half the tribe of Manasseh, and there are now, it leaves you with 9.5 tribes. That's what verse 13 is saying. And getting at verse 14, starts dividing up the names of the tribes and different ones. And in verse 16, the Lord spoke to Moses, these are the names of the men who shall divide up the land, or responsible for dividing up the land. They have to submit there to the divisions, according to what Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun say. And then God actually went as far as to select a representative from each of the tribes so that they can then receive the inheritance and then divide it up appropriately among the families. And that takes us to the end of chapter 34. Chapter 35, we deal with the Levites. The Levites are not numbered among the tribes of Israel as far as being able to receive an inheritance. The reason for that is because, according to the Lord is the inheritance of the Levites, not the land. And so, in many ways, if you look at it spiritually, the Levites have the bigger inheritance, the greater inheritance. Their inheritance is the Lord himself. But they still have to live in houses. They have to raise their families. And so the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from the Jericho, saying, command the children of Israel that they give the Levites cities to dwell in from the inheritance of their possession. You shall also give the Levites common land around the cities. That's the way they can grow their tomatoes and their fig trees. And that's what that was really much about. And there was probably around 42 cities that the Levites got, but their primary inheritance was the Lord. And that pretty much is something that is covered up until verse 8. In verse 9, the Lord spoke to Moses again, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall appoint cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the manslayer who kills any person accidentally may flee. They shall be cities of refuge for you from the avenger, that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation in judgment. So, today we have a big thing. You've been hearing about it. We have what they call sanctuary cities or sanctuary states. And we have that going on today, and it's quite controversial. This is God's idea of the sanctuary cities. This is his solution for that, if you will. And this is for when someone actually commits a crime. Now, there were 6 total sanctuary cities. I'm calling them that. They were called cities of refuge. There were 6 of them, 3 on the west side of the Jordan River, 3 on the east side of the Jordan River, and they were positioned in a way so that if anyone did commit a crime, accidentally a murderous crime, then they would be able to have enough time to actually flee to one of these sanctuary cities. Now, the difference in God's way versus the way it is today, if someone commits a crime, they must have their day in court. That's the difference that we see in many of the things that are going on today. But the point is, they can go there, and then the city of refuge, the avenger does not have permission to go in and kill him. Now, if he's outside of the city, well, he's fair game. And so you want to get into this city of refuge. The purpose of the city of refuge was so that the law can be carried out appropriately. So that there was the tradition back there of revenge. And if you remember, like the Hatfields and the McCoys, we know that story, that kind of the legend. I suppose it's not a legend, but if someone kills your cousin, well, you are honor bound to revenge your cousin's death. And so you kill the one that killed your cousin and maybe 2 others in that family. That'll teach them never to kill my cousin again, kind of a thing. And so this was appropriate behavior of that day. And God says, well, it may be appropriate in your world, but in mine I like justice and I like mercy. And in that type of revenge world, no one ever asked the question, did you kill him by accident or was it on purpose? Nobody ever cared. Doesn't matter because you killed my cousin. I don't care if it's an accident or not. I'm going to kill you. And so that became a real issue. And God says, no. We're going to do this the right way. We're going to do it the fair way. Because a lot of people are killed accidentally just by doing crazy things or working in a field together with your brother, with your friend, and you're chopping down a tree and the axe handle flies off and hits your friend in the head and kills him. Now what are you going to do? My friend's relatives are going to be chasing me down until I'm dead. And so you run to the city of refuge and you say, I want to talk to a judge. We want to have this settled. And that's what the city of refuge was supposed to be about. In verse 15, these 6 cities shall be for refuge for the children of Israel, for the stranger, for the sojourner among them, for everyone, and anyone who kills a person accidentally may flee there, and he will have his day in court. That's what verse 12 said, until he stands before the congregation in judgment, his day in court. But, in verse 16, if he strikes him with an iron implement so that he dies, he's a murderer, and the murderer shall be put to death. Now, verse 17, notice the end, the murderer shall surely be put to death. Verse 18, the murderer shall surely be put to death. Verse 19, he shall put him to death. This is God's way of dealing with people who do murder. Now, not someone who kills accidentally, not someone who carries a badge and kills in the course of his duty, not someone who is a military person and kills in war. That's not murder. It is something that is ordained by God, in fact, protected by God in Scripture. A lot of people don't realize that. They think it's all the same. Murder is murder. You killed a human life. It's murder. Not necessarily. Not in God's economy. In our kind of fallen thinking, it might look that way. But in God's economy, and you're going to see by the end of this chapter how he explains that. But in verse 22, it starts talking about the person who kills someone accidentally. He wasn't his enemy. He wasn't lying in wait for him. In verse 23, he was not his enemy. He wasn't trying to seek his harm. Well, then the congregation shall judge between the manslayer and the avenger of blood according to these judgments. Meaning, you bring the manslayer in with the avenger, the one who's bound by honor to kill him on behalf of his dead relative. Then this has to be settled. All right, you're a manslayer. You killed the guy accidentally. We understand that, but this family now is hurting, so can you provide something for the family? That kind of thing. A just and fair resolution should come from it. That's the idea. So verse 25, the congregation then shall deliver the manslayer from the hand of the avenger of blood, protect him, in other words, until the congregation shall return to the city of refuge where he fled. And then that man has to stay in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. So even if he kills someone accidentally, there's no charges that could be brought against him, but he has to stay still in the city of refuge. He leaves his home, over there near the shore, and he's got to stay in the city of refuge until the current high priest is out of office. That's his sentence, if you will. Because, we have rules, we have laws regarding murder versus manslaughter. Manslayer is manslaughter, meaning you killed him, but that wasn't really, my intent was to kill him, but I killed him nonetheless. And so it becomes manslaughter. And you pay a price, you pay a penalty for even your carelessness or whatever you want to call it. But once the high priest has died or removed, then the manslayer is free to go. He's served his time. The avenger is not right in avenging the death of his relative, so you have to keep your hands off of him. But If the manslayer at any time goes outside the limits of the city of refuge where he fled, well, again, he's fair game. So, verse 30, whoever kills a person, now he's talking about those who actually commit murder. Whoever kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the testimony of witnesses. Notice this is really fascinating. It's where our government created laws. At least it used to be founded on these things. It says, they shall be put to death on the testimony of witnesses, but one witness is not sufficient testimony against a person for the death penalty. So, I saw him kill that man. Yeah, but you're just one witness. We need more than that. So, to put someone to death was so serious that even God didn't want to see it happen. In Deuteronomy, it explains this law a little further. On the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be established. Jesus repeated it in Matthew, and so did the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians. This was a repeated standard of witnesses. And so to put someone to death was a serious step, and you better be sure about it. And that's the idea here. Verse 31, moreover, you shall take no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall surely be put to death, meaning you can't buy yourself out of this. You can't surrender all of your goods. You killed someone, you have to be put to death. And here's why. In verse 33, so you shall not pollute the land where you are, for blood, meaning innocent blood that has been shed, defiles the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. So this is God's justification for the death penalty. And I'm sure there are tons of you here who don't believe in the death penalty, and that's fine. Our government's going to do what it's going to do. Our government is not under this book any longer like we used to be in the early days. And so our government's going to do what they're going to do. But this tells us something, that to reap the consequences of a society that protects those who rob life, innocent life. Now, I believe God is pro-life, and I'm not talking about in just the abortion sense. I do believe he is against abortion because of this. Innocent life must be protected. God believes that those who shed blood need to be taken out of this world. You have lost the privilege to life because you took a life. You do not have the authority to take a life. That's why murder has such a strict penalty against it. You kill someone, if you meant to do it, then there are consequences. Your life should not be spared. And God said there's no exception for that. So, in our laws, we have different laws. Well, he killed someone because of this or that, and so he's got a life sentence, or he's going to serve 25 years, or he's going to serve whatever. And it's up in the air. I guess there's a consequence and a price to pay, but then often we let them out on the streets, and not many of them go straight. So they're going to do crime again. But God says in verse 34, do not defile the land which you inhabit, in the midst of which I dwell. For I, the Lord, dwell among the children of Israel. So he's saying, I don't want you to make my house, my land. God's saying, this is my land, and don't defile my land. Well, chapter 36 is sort of an easy book to chapter to summarize because we already covered it in chapter 27. Remember, God is dividing up the land. He's giving the land to different parts of the families, and then the girls come to him and say, yeah, what about us? My father had all girls, and we don't have a husband, and what about us? We want to get married, and he dies. Who gets the land? It belongs to the girls. That's what God said. And the only thing is, you have to marry within your tribe, so that the land must always stay with the tribe, lest though the tribe of Reuben goes over and marries all the girls in Judah and steals all the land. And now Reuben has more land than it was inherited, and that's not the way it has to be. God wanted to keep it all where he wanted it to where he gave it. This is their inheritance. If the girls marry outside of their tribe, they lose the land. It's as simple as that. It's just a common sense thing, because to God, the land was important and had to remain with the assigned families. This is what verse 6 says. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, let them marry whom they think best, but they marry only within the family of their father's tribe. So the inheritance of the children of Israel shall not change hands from tribe to tribe, for every one of the children of Israel shall keep the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers. We conclude, I'll read just verse 13 here. These are the commandments and the judgments which the Lord commanded the children of Israel by the hand of Moses in the plains of Moab, by the Jordan, across from Jericho. And we read that type of a saying so many times. This place on the east side of the Jordan, was a very important place for Moses to conduct his final affairs of the nation. And this became then the end of Moses' ministry. Now we get in the book of Deuteronomy, and a few more stories are going to be told, of course. A lot of it is repeating what we've already seen, but I like Deuteronomy. It's different. Even though it's somewhat of the same, it's different. The end of Deuteronomy, we end pretty much around the same place, with Moses finishing his his duties. And then he walks up the mountain, and God takes him and kills him and buries him there, or he dies and God buries him somewhere up in the mountains. And he didn't tell anyone where he buried him, because I imagine someone would have stolen the body and built a shrine over it or something, and that's not what happened. So I like these stories. The foundation of the whole Jewish faith, but more than that, the explanation of all that God required of his people. Much of our modern law was built on these laws here. It's been evolved over time, but much of it started right here. More than that, God created government. It was his idea. It was his design. And these are the laws that were to govern God's people. I think it's wonderful that America, in its early days, took the law and used it as its foundation. As I said, through the years, times have changed, our culture has changed, things have evolved. It's almost impossible to recognize God's law in our laws today. But you see, there may be some skeletons that are still part of that remain. So, unfortunately, we didn't learn from God's law. And we were once a people that did call upon God, and I'd like to think that we would one day have the opportunity to return to that experience. Whether it will happen or not is yet to be seen. But as we see, if we don't chase out the bad influences, well, then we will become influenced and become idolatrous and immoral and sinful. If we don't curb our appetite for crime, well, then we are defiling our own inhabitants, our own land, our own habitation is what I meant to say. And if we become a nation that doesn't even obey our own laws, well, what makes us think we're going to obey God's laws? So God help us, really, as a people. This is a law written for the children of Israel. Not for every nation, but for the children of Israel. But it becomes a model, a pattern for all people who would come to the Lord and submit themselves to him. And if we will do that, And I don't think he cares whether we're Israel or America or Germany or China or anywhere. If we'll submit to the Lord, I think there are good things that will happen. Lord, I pray that you'll bless your word into our hearts. Of course, we can't change our entire nation. We can pray for our nation. That's what you've asked us to do, and identify with our nation. Lord, we as a people in America anyway have really turned our back from what we once were. I pray that we'd see that. Pray for our leaders, our current and our future leaders. I pray that we would always look to you for hope, and that they would look to you for hope, that they would open up this book and find the truth, like when Ezra read it to the people and they tore their clothes and realized just how far they had gone. And Lord, you brought revival to them in that day. I pray we would do the same. You said if your people will humble themselves and pray and seek your face, you'll heal the land. Lord, that's my prayer for our people. We would come full circle, come back home to you, so that you'll continue to bless this wonderful place. Now bless your word, Lord, into the hearts of your people. May we carry this as a torch in the world of darkness. In Jesus' name, amen.